free market. Do tune in. We are, thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time. We're brought to you by Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters, exploring local economy, the free market, and trying to give some indication of how we can be more prosperous by improving our ideas, maybe expecting more of ourselves, and improving our service to others through our businesses, through our works of charity, through our families, and in what we say and do. I have here in the studio Emily O'Donnell. She is an attorney, and she represents the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga. And she worked for 7 years with Legal Aid of East Tennessee, and was also working with the Public Education Foundation as the Vice President of External Relations. And just last week, was there an annual meeting just last week? It was
a luncheon called Voices.
And what happened at this event?
At that event, we rolled out our new campaign, which we are calling 49 to 1. It's exciting to me to do this work. Tennessee is ranked 49th among the states in the status of women, and the Women's Fund is working to move us toward 1. So we told our guests exactly how we're going to do that by working on the areas that matter most for women and the status of women. Work and family, reproductive rights, employment and earnings, poverty and opportunity, health and well-being, political participation, safety and violence. These are all places where Tennessee trails behind the rest of the country, and we are hoping to make improvements through advocacy and philanthropy.
So the work is effectively lobbying or publishing. When you say advocacy, that means you're pushing for something and you're wanting people to give you an audience. How do you view your work as advocate? To whom do you advocate, and what exactly are you advocating?
The bulk of our advocacy is at the state legislature. We have had some local campaigns. We've had some statewide awareness raising campaigns, but we do have a legislative agenda that we work to pass or defeat bills in the Tennessee legislature every year. And so those are bills that we advocate for, the bills that we think will promote women's equality, and we advocate against those that we believe will harm women.
Well, can you be specific about the last session?
Sure. About pay equity? Yes, we are very much in favor of the passage of the Tennessee Pay Equality Act. We have been for years, and we hope that it is introduced again this year, as it is nearly every year in Tennessee.
What are the arguments for it?
The arguments are that discrimination is not okay. Women deserve to be paid equally. We know they are not being paid equally. And the system that we have in place is to create a private right of action for a person who is being discriminated against. And so that is how we think this issue should be addressed at a state level.
There is no private cause of action now in the statute.
Okay.
Is that right? I'm asking.
There's no statute right now.
Right, there is no other grounds in law for a private action on pay inequity, is my question.
There are in racial inequities. This is just to women. This addresses the problem.
So it adds women to the category of people whom are protected.
Women are already protected under the federal law, but it brings that to Tennessee. So, for example, okay, if an employer says, I'm going to pay Black people less, obviously they can sue to right that wrong, and we are asking that the same protection be given to women.
So, getting back to the original question, Emily O'Donnell, in Tennessee law, there's nothing now that gives that would let a woman stand on part of the statute to say, I have grounds here to stand, and I want my grievance to be heard in a civil court, right? It has to be. There is no statute to stand on. It's just a private claim, or.
Well, if it's a federal employer, yes, but this would apply to Tennessee business.
Well, are not all Tennessee businesses federal employers if they file federal tax returns?
No.
Are they not subject to federal law?
Not this law, not the.
So there's no federal statute which provides the protections that is proposed in this law.
There is. It doesn't apply uniformly to Tennessee businesses.
Well, how is that? How does a federal statute not apply in Tennessee?
It doesn't apply as it is written to certain Tennessee businesses. So this would close a very narrow gap in the law where certain businesses in Tennessee are allowed to discriminate against women and pay them less for equal work.
Can you talk about where those businesses are, what kinds they are?
No.
So there's a gap in the federal statute that allows in Tennessee discrimination for sex, right? Discrimination on sex, and your proposal will eliminate that group. In other words, there's not a federal cause of action. So your bill would give a state cause of action for a small group of employers or a large group of employers. Well, can you characterize these employers if you're not going to identify the types?
I don't know
Emily?
the exact businesses who are discriminating against women. I haven't studied every business in Tennessee. What I do know is that we have plenty of data to show that women are paid less than men and that our wage gap is not set to close until the year 2057. So I don't know. I can't name the businesses who would be affected by this, but it would make uniform the law in Tennessee. And this is not my proposal. This has been going on for many, many years in our legislature, and many other states have adopted these regulations.
So that would include, I didn't ask you to name particular companies. I just asked you to name the types of businesses. So we say printing businesses, restaurants,
sure.
Insurance companies,
Yes.
Newspaper companies, people who run garages, right? People who run skating alleys, right?
Sure.
We're talking about really every kind of business. But you said it's a narrow group. That's what I was asking
Well,
about.
many businesses are already under federal law.
And how do they get under federal law in Tennessee?
I don't understand the question that you're asking me.
The proposal that Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga is for, that hasn't passed, seeks to address a problem in the federal law. The problem, as you described it, Emily
No,
O'Donnell.
it's a problem in the state law.
Okay, well, in the state law. Okay, so, well, fill me in again. I guess I'm the slow man of Chattanooga, and I'm just not exactly following what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that the Women's Fund believes that women should be paid equally for equal work, and if they are being discriminated against by their employer, they should have a right to address that harm.
And they can address that harm in Tennessee law now. That's why this bill you're proposing be passed.
Correct.
Well, what are some of the other measures, Emily O'Donnell of Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga, that need to be dealt with in the legislature? What are other wrongs that have to be corrected by writing of more laws?
We are in favor of the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act. This allows women to have reasonable accommodations if they are pregnant or nursing. It carves out a small business hardship exception so that no business suffers unnecessarily. But we believe that these policies are necessary to help women stay in the workforce during their reproductive years so that they can support themselves and their children and their families. So, for example, a woman who needs a water break while she is pregnant, or maybe a stool to sit on if she's on some kind of factory line, would be granted that reasonable accommodation. A nursing mother might have a non-bathroom place to pump breast milk for the birth of her child so that she can return to work.
And how long has that bill been proposed?
To my understanding is last year was the first year that it was presented, and it failed.
It failed in committee or subcommittee?
I'd have to look at my notes.
Well, what other kind of legislation, Emily O'Donnell, do you propose benefit women in Tennessee?
We do a lot of work around safety and violence. We helped pass a number of bills to strengthen the laws against human trafficking several years ago. And this year I'm working with local judges to raise awareness and create a sentence enhancement for domestic violence when it occurs in the presence of children. We are learning about the adverse childhood experiences and how traumatic things like domestic violence can be to children. And so we are hoping to raise awareness and make sure that everybody from judges to defendants to men and women understand the long-term devastating effects that children have when they are exposed to violence.
Now, is that bill simply a one-pager, or does that go on for some length? The sentence enhancement bill for children.
It's not written yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, it sounds like you could just it sounds like it would probably be a short bill if that's all you're trying to do is enhance the sentencing for domestic abuse. Is that under the assault statute?
It's under the domestic assault statute.
Well, say some more about Emily O'Donnell, about some of the particular measures that you have worked on in the past, the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga has worked on, or that you maybe plan to work on as the head here?
Well, part of that depends on what happens in January. We can only advocate for or against bills that have been introduced in the legislature. So part of that is sitting back and waiting to see what our elected officials do and making an appropriate response.
Well, you're an attorney and know a lot about crafting legal language. If you had time to write a bill, what would it be about?
It would be about pay equity.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this then: does the work that I'm holding here, which runs about 7 or 8 pages, does this need some serious revisions? You, lawyer and editor and craftsman or craftswoman.
Yes, I think that
how can this be improved?
Many of our Tennessee statutes end up being a little unwieldy for the attorneys who have to practice those statutes. And sometimes they contradict each other. Sometimes they are just very unclear as to who they apply to. And sometimes they contradict themselves within themselves, and sometimes they contradict other laws. We have a law that says we need to teach about domestic violence in schools. And then we have another law that says, yes, but you can't mention sex. Those things, smart people can come to different conclusions about how you navigate those two laws. And that is a gross oversimplification. But it's difficult to write laws that can be clearly digested by everybody.
Well, the Kyle bill, it's number 1106. How could this bill, since the listener has heard about it now, and it's been something like this or something like this has been proposed before, how could this be improved in the way it's shaped, or what the articulation of the power of claim?
Well, that's that this is a bill that has failed in the past. So this is not necessarily the text of the bill that will be introduced in this legislative season. I think that this is pretty fair. I think that it carves out exceptions. It protects employers while protecting the workforce. I don't have a large problem with the way that it's written. I think it carves out the exceptions that it needs to. It accounts for a bona fide reason to pay somebody less than somebody else, and still protects women from being discriminated against based on their sex.
Well, who are the supporters of Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga? It's a 501c3 or C4?
It's a 501c3. We don't endorse any candidates. We are a bipartisan group. Our board represents several parties. We have a broad base of support.
And how is it funded? What do you do in your major fundraiser for the year, and who comes to it?
Well, last week was our major fundraiser at our Voices Luncheon. We had about 450 guests. They were business leaders, nonprofit heads, concerned citizens, people who are thinking about these things now that they have a daughter, Joe Schmo on the street. I think you would have even had a good time there.
Probably. I'm a very liberal person,
Mm-hmm.
a classical liberal. Well, let me ask about the question of poverty. You mentioned poverty is one of the things, Emily O'Donnell, that you're concerned about. Touching women. Last year, the time, I think it was last year, the Times Free Press had a series dealing with poverty, and one very striking piece in some detail pointed out that I think most of the households in Chattanooga that are in poverty are women without men present, not husband or boyfriend present, with children. How does the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga think it can help women, particularly in that context?
I'm not sure I understand your question. How do we help single mothers?
Well, yes, since single mothers are those mostly in poverty with children. They have 2 jobs, that they can't make their payments. They have debts and they have children to take care of, and not enough family support. So that's what came out in that story. So what is your organization's view on their plight, explaining how they got there, or what can you say about what you would propose be done in their favor?
Well, I think the Pay Equity Act is a huge part of that. Those are women who are supporting families, and they need to be paid a fair wage. Wages certainly matter. A woman who's working 2 jobs and still living in poverty isn't succeeding in life, and we want her to succeed. So those are exactly the types of policies that we believe will help women to leave poverty.
So again, because your group is involved in advocacy, it is talking, the problem, your discussion is always to the legislature, to senators and representatives, officials in the executive branch and the various agencies. Those are the people you're talking to. Those are the ones who have the answer in the end to the problems of women in Chattanooga.
Not always. We convene women to discuss issues. We promote their own political participation. We help women to foster their own relationships with their elected officials and empower them as advocates for the laws that they think should be passed. We have informational convenings. We had one on healthcare a couple of months ago with a panel of experts to talk about how the different proposed healthcare plans might affect women's health. So we want to empower with knowledge. We advocate for women to be empowered and make their own decisions, and also be advocates for themselves and their communities.
It seems to me that the Women's Fund may be making a mistake that American organizations, American people, and even the American church has been making for a long time, and that is to think that somehow the answer to our problem is political. Is it not fair to say that the god of politics is dead? That politics, if you look at voting rates, politics has less and less claim on the imagination and interest of the people, that we somehow realize that we can't just pass more laws, we can't just convene another Congress, we can't just create a new committee, we can't just create another government program to help this rent-seeking group or that. Is there not something more than just laws and statutes that deserve the interest of women in Chattanooga?
Sure. There are lots and lots of great nonprofits who serve the women in our community. We have Girls Inc., we have Tech Town, we have lots and lots of different nonprofits that provide direct services, and those are very, very important. But the Women's Fund does not provide direct services. We do believe that there's ground to be gained in the political realm.
And you're here because that's not being done by other groups.
That's right.
That have a female-centric job or purpose.
That is correct. We are occupying a space that we saw a need for in Chattanooga.
Well, excuse me. This is David Tulis. Thanks for joining us. We're talking with Emily O'Donnell. She oversees the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga. She's an attorney. And let me ask you about some of your legal work, Emily. Have you had cases that have you pursued, civil cases or defended criminal cases, which help you make the point of your work now and your calling in general and your work now with the Women's Fund? Have you been involved in cases that my listener needs to hear about?
Absolutely. So when I worked at Legal Aid, I was a civil-only lawyer for low-income citizens in our community, and actually in a 12-county region. And what I saw was that there were problems with the law, and that only the legislative body could fix those problems. For example, the first case that I filed in Chancery Court was on behalf of a woman who was being evicted because she called the police to her home. She was a victim of domestic violence, and her lease said, if the police are called to your home, you will be evicted. That is legal. That was legal in Tennessee. And so
that was a legal thing to have in a rental agreement?
Yes. It was not only legal, it was actually in the state statute that any crime committed on a rental property would be cause for the eviction of the whole family. So that's bad public policy. We do not want a person to have to choose between being beaten or calling the police. We want to encourage people to utilize law enforcement and be safe. Furthermore, I think it's...
What happened in that case? Tell the story.
I lost that case.
What happened?
It fell apart during discovery, as many cases do. But
What do you mean? What happened?
What happened?
Why did it fall apart in discovery? How come you couldn't get the jury to hear it?
There was no jury. I lost on it was 8 years ago, a motion for an injunction, and it came out that there were actually legal or different reasons for the landlord to terminate her lease. But his stated reason was she called the police. So you can imagine that's just bad public policy. We don't want an abuser to go to jail and have 3 square meals and the woman and children to be evicted and living out of their
So that
car.
statute's still on the books in the Tennessee Code?
No, I wrote a bill to create an exception for that, and it passed unanimously in both houses. And that was a really good example of using the legislature to close some unjust gaps in the law.
What are some other things that you saw in your legal career, Emily O'Donnell, that serve the purposes that you're now working with the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga?
Well, the legislation I'm writing right now to raise awareness about the effect of domestic violence on children was one that I saw all the time. I saw a belief by women, victims, abusers, judges, other attorneys that if he didn't hit the kids, it was okay. And what we are learning is that just because the kids don't see it, they hear it, they know what's happening, they are traumatized, and that leads to a life of problems, from substance abuse issues to mental health issues, cancer, early death. The trauma of early childhood can have a long-term devastating effect on children and who grow up to be adults. They have educational problems, behavior problems.
Now, did you say you wrote a bill for that?
I'm in the process of writing a bill. That's the sentence enhancement, which is not going to be additional jail time, because the data says that jail time doesn't really rehabilitate domestic abusers. So we want to raise awareness, maybe look at some sort of counseling or educational component.
How does the driver license statute afflict women over men? That is to say, women who have violated, who are driving on suspended or revoked, and then they're jailed because they can't pay the fine. We have a kind of debtor's prison all across the country. What do you know about that element of state aggression against individuals?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, there's a suit been filed in federal court in Nashville that seeks to rescue poor people from their fines, which prevent, if the fine it comes to the Department of Safety's attention, the user of the road loses his driver license and effectively is facing a civil death sentence, being unable to travel without it.
Right.
And that afflicts the poor people more than anybody, according to the people who have filed the suit on behalf of several impoverished people who are sort of stuck at home. Sure. Does that problem afflict women more than my listener realizes?
I'm not aware that it affects women disproportionately. I think it affects poor people disproportionately, and it does create a debtor's prison. But I think that is equally terrible policy for men and women.
Do you know whether we have a debtor's prison in Hamilton County?
I think anytime somebody is jailed because they didn't pay a fine, you could call that a debtor's prison. So yes, we do have that in Hamilton County.
Or someone who has a bond that he can't make or she can't make.
That's not a debtor's prison. A bond is not owed.
Well said. This is David Tulis. We're talking with Emily O'Donnell. Emily, how can my listener find out more about the Women's Fund, and what's the website, and how can he get a hold of you?
The website is ChattanoogaWomen'sFund.org. All of my information is there. Would love to talk more about it with your listener who matters.
ChattanoogaWomen'sFund.org, and we're talking with Emily O'Donnell. And how long have you been in your position?
Oh, just about 90 days.
90 days.
Brand
Okay.
new.
Well, thanks for joining us, Emily.
Thank you.
David Tulis, we thank you for giving us a couple minutes of your time. We are sponsored by Nooganomics.com. Nooganomics.com is the website for Man Who Matters. We suggest that you love your neighbor and buy local, and be provincial, right? I'm the recovering cosmopolite, and I think we should all be more provincial. And I'm working at it. I really am. This is David Tulis, and now I've got some important announcements. Remember, support our sponsors, support our advertisers. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's News Talk